Welcome, Steve and Darrell.
Thank you. This is Darrell. I'll probably start if we just go to the next slide. Um, in fact, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Over the last 5 months, I think Steve and Sarah Elk and I have probably had discussions with senior executives at well over 100 companies. And we hear a very common theme, and that is it's a new world out there. We're operating in an environment of constant crises and what has been called black swan events, rare events that don't feel that rare anymore. These days, yes, we're coping with a pandemic disease, but everybody knows that will pass and there will likely be other diseases, but that's not the end of it. There are terrorist events, there are natural disasters, there is social unrest, there are financial shocks, there are military conflicts and trade wars. It just feels like a never ending series of crises. And on the one hand, I've talked to dozens of executives that say, after reading your book, we're realizing that we've been forced to do a lot of agile things over the last few months. And we feel pretty good about some of that. We're learning to make decisions faster. We're learning to prioritize, drop off some things that were customs, but not really altogether that important. We're empowering people to make decisions. We're removing some of the hierarchical levels of approval. And we feel very good about that. We'd love to bottle it up and ask, how can we continue doing this even when this crisis passes? On the other hand, one of the things that you, Darrell, say in the book is if you're not having fun, you're not doing Agile right. And clearly, we're doing some things wrong because we're exhausting our people, we're fatiguing our people, we're wearing them out. So, how do we learn to do this the right way? How do we keep the parts of speed that we like so much, but add in the parts that make Agile more systematic and more sustainable? On the next slide, please. That's really our objective. Our objective is to help build a business that will thrive in a world of unpredictable and accelerating change. And that really means three things. One is, yes, we're doing better at innovation, but how do we turn this sporadic innovation into systematic innovation that will sustain agility as crises come and go without having to reinvent it every 2 or 3 years? Second of all, how do we take advantage of this opportunity to gain strength and market share while some of the more sluggish competitors get culled from the market, from the herd? And third, we want to figure out how to improve results. And Agile defines results in four buckets: customer results, employee results, shareholder results, community results. And I think this crisis is bringing the necessity of balancing all of these things into proper perspective, because for many, it's a matter of life and death with our customers. And many have been forced to sacrifice short term earnings for community benefits. And this is what we're trying to do, is to find that right balance. On the next slide, please. Doing that requires that companies do three things. On the left, number one, we have to run the business, let's call that operations, efficiently. This is what traditional management has done very well for decades. We have to figure out how to develop stable and predictable processes and minimize the risk of variation from critical operating standards. That little wave sign on the bottom shows that what we're trying to do in operations is to actually minimize variability. We start with operations that have a lot of variability, and we use things like Lean and Lean Six Sigma to reduce the variability and improve our efficiency. At the same time, we have to change the business. Let's call that innovation. We have to change the business as quickly as our customers are changing, as our competitors are changing, as the technologies are changing. And adaptation requires variability. I know it feels risky, but if you think innovation is risky, I would say try stagnation, because in our experience, stagnation is far more dangerous. We don't see nearly as many companies dying because of doing too much innovation as those that die from not doing enough. And as we increase innovation, as we increase experimentation, we're actually going to increase variability. But if we do it right, we're going to cut out unfavorable variability faster than ever before. We're going to learn how to test and prototype and cut out variability that isn't working. And when we find things that are working, we're going to accelerate it like never before. Run the business more efficiently, change the business more effectively, and harmonize those two activities. Because much like yin and yang in the Asian philosophy, we need each other. Yes, we require different tools in order to succeed, but they're complementary, interdependent, mutually beneficial capabilities that need each other to succeed. I'm very tired of Agile zealots who are trying to say the only way to make Agile work is to overthrow the traditional ways of working. You have to throw them out completely and start from scratch. That's wrong. What we need to do is to bring them back into balance, because we tend to get out of balance. On the next slide, please. It's not that traditional management methods are evil, are inherently evil. It's just when they get out of balance, they have a way of making hierarchical command and control so overpowering that it kills the ability to innovate. We focus on cranking out products. We favor predictability. We only choose products or projects that we think are very, very safe, where we're 90 or 95% sure that we can win. We don't go for breakthroughs, and we try to get people to operate as predictably as machines. That does not work for innovation. On the next slide, please. The problem is that bureaucracies try to manage innovation the same way they manage, just click it once more, we'll get some animation there, the way they would try to manage any other routine operation. That is, we find a problem, we generate ideas, and then here's the key in red. We believe that we can predict specific requirements of what to develop, and then we just design, develop, verify, integrate. It's just an assembly line, and out at the end pops an innovation. The problem is that predicting and commanding and controlling do not work. And the longer the life cycle of the development process, the less likely it is to work. The less likely it is to work, because the ability to predict what customers are going to want a year from now, 2 years from now, in a rapidly changing environment, almost impossible. And so this is where innovation tends to go wrong most frequently, predicting specific requirements. If you could go to the next slide, please. There's a substantial amount of data to show that 70 to 90% of business innovations fail. It's an alarming number. 70 to 90% of business innovations fail to deliver what they were predicted to deliver. Of those that succeed, 2/3 of those have to pivot significantly from their original visions. 2/3. Now, let me just show you some data. On the far left, this is from a professor that analyzed the Inc. 500. These are the 500 fastest growing private companies in the US. And they found something interesting. They said, let's look at the businesses that exist today. Let's go back to your plans in the past and see how much you've had to adapt. And the answer, 2/3 of people have had to adapt in order to achieve success. I find the same thing when I talk to venture capitalists. This happens to be data from a fellow named Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, who looked back over his most successful investments and said, when I look at the plan that I originally funded, and when I look at the business today, 2/3 of them have had to change. Remarkable consistency, actually. Let me just offer a little bit of history in my personal life. So if you look in the on the right hand side, you'll see a toy, a Slinky. When I grew up, I'm very old, I'm happy to admit. When I grew up, we did not have computers. We did not have video games. We did not have tablets. And what we did have were simpler toys. This happens to be a Slinky. The funny thing about the Slinky is it was never invented as a toy. In fact, it was invented by an engineer who was trying to stabilize sensitive instruments in turbulent seas. What happened when he was working on it is it fell onto a stack of books, onto a desk, onto a chair, onto the floor, stood up, and he said, "That's cool. This might make a pretty interesting toy." And he brought it home to the neighborhood kids. Neighborhood kids played with it on stairways, and he said, "This is a much better toy than it is engineering device." And so it became one of the very first toys to enter the Toy Hall of Fame. Extraordinarily successful. I'm sure a number of you working in technology teams use Slack. You may not know that Slack originally began as a video game company. It went bankrupt as a video game company. And in the process, the venture capitalists, the owners, went in and said, "Is there anything that we can save from this?" And they said, "Well, yeah, in the back room, the engineers have a communication tool that they use." They looked at it, they said this might work, and they relaunched the company as Slack based on this communication tool. And shortly thereafter, it became the fastest growing unicorn, the fastest growing company to reach $1 billion valuation of all time. I don't know how many of you have seen in the lower right-hand corner this Disney animation movie, Frozen. I will tell you, I have 3 married children. I have 8 grandchildren. For 2 years, I watched this movie at least once a day, every day of the week, most commonly with one of my granddaughters who could not get enough of this. I got so interested in the movie that I went back and did a little bit of research on the history. Interestingly enough, Disney started trying to make this movie back in 1930s. And it failed multiple times. It was based on Hans Christian Andersen, um, on the book of the Ice Queen. And in the book and in the original movie, the hero, Elsa, was evil. She was Cruella de Vil. She was Maleficent. She was Ursula. She does a deal with a peasant girl, Anna, to heal a broken heart by freezing it. And in the middle of making the movie, in come a husband and wife songwriting team. And they say, "Please don't throw us out, but we don't think Elsa's evil. We think she's misunderstood. Just listen to this song." And they played a song called "Let It Go." And when the director and others heard the song, they said, "Oh my goodness, this changes everything. You're right. The song is a hit. We have to rewrite the movie." And they did, completely rewrote the movie. They made Elsa beautiful. They made Elsa and Anna beloved sisters who cared deeply for each other. They made Elsa misunderstood, but strong. And it changed the history of that movie and animated films. I'm sure many of you have played around on YouTube, but I wonder how many of you know how YouTube originally got started. I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos many years ago. I've been there, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, and I ran into a founder of YouTube. And we were chatting about how it got started. And he said it got started as an online video dating service. And after 1 week, we had 0 people that had submitted an online video to date somebody else. 0. And so we changed the strategy. We opened it up and said, put anything on there that you want. Cats, dogs, children, funny videos, we don't care. And from there, it took off. So my request is, if you only remember one thing from this presentation, it is plan to adapt. Because if you don't plan to adapt, you do plan to fail. Because 2/3 of your innovations will fail. First, because they're developing the wrong thing, or second of all, because they're developing something that the organization refuses to adopt. On the next slide, please. This is really what Agile does. Agile takes the traditional innovation process on the left, and the traditional innovation process says, we can't start anything until we've got the perfect plan. And it becomes an enormous boulder that we have to do everything in order to succeed. We have to have a perfect plan. We have to avoid any failures. We have to give positive reports on progress. We control and power the team. We add layers of hierarchical approval to make sure that they adhere to the plan as it was originally outlined. Agile flips that on its head and says, no, get started. Break that large, complex problem into smaller stones that we know we can move. Start with the first, get going. We can change the order of the features, the functions, the needs that we're going to address. We know we're not going to get it perfect up front. We are going to plan to adapt. We're going to get people who are focused on the team full time. We're going to trust and coach them, and we're going to collaborate continuously with customers to make sure that we're doing the right thing. On the next slide, please. Evidence from tens of thousands of Agile teams show that it works. It's not 100% accurate. And I don't want to suggest that every Agile team hits a home run. But if you look at these success rates on the left, Agile teams are successful anywhere from 60 to 100% more frequently than traditional teams. And just as importantly, they adapt far more quickly. Team morale is higher, time to market is higher, much greater visibility into how things are going. We know it works. Empirical data from more than 50,000 teams shows that it works. On the next slide, please. But interestingly enough, over the last 2 months, I've been working with 3 of the companies that I'll bet you and most people would consider to be the three of the most agile organizations in the world. I'm sure of it because they're all running more than 2,000 agile teams, 2 of them more than 3,000 agile teams. But here's what they're telling us. They're saying, look, launching agile teams, that's easy. We can do that all day, every day. That's not the challenge. Agile teams don't create agile businesses. That's what we want to talk to you about. How do we make that transformation to create a truly agile business? Because just hundreds or thousands of agile teams, that's not going to do it. Next slide, please. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to use agile approaches to create an agile business system. So starting at the top, what we're trying to do is bring balance, find what Aristotle would call the golden mean between a static organization and a chaotic organization. That's what Agile is. It's at neither extreme. It's the balance between stasis and chaos. And in order to achieve that, we may have to look at our purpose and values, our strategy, our leadership and our culture, our management systems, planning, budgeting, reviewing. By the way, I will tell you that when I look at planning and budgeting and reviewing processes, I'll actually start by asking companies, how does it work today? Tell me about your strategic planning system. Oh, we do strategic planning once a year. And what about budgeting? Yep, we do budgeting once a year. And what about your performance reviews? Yeah, we do those once a year. How about bonuses? Well, they're not called annual bonuses for nothing. We do them once a year. Why once a year? What in the world is magical about once a year? I think annual cycles may be the dumbest concept in business. Because what is an annual cycle? Why are we so fixated on a year? There's only one answer to that, and that is that's how long it takes the Earth to orbit the sun. Is that a reason to structure every part of our management process around a year? Certainly, customers don't change based on yearly functions. And if a customer comes to you with a major problem and says, I am fed up with how this is working, can you please fix it? And you say, well, I'd love to, but here's the problem. You see, we have this budgeting process and we're already fixed on how we're going to spend that budget. And right now we're only a third of the way around the sun. So, well, what can I do? There's nothing I can do to fix it. Come back in 8 months when we've completed our orbit, and then maybe I can do something for you. Agile just doesn't believe it. Agile is going to work more frequently on quarterly cycles, sometimes monthly cycles, frequent feedback loops. Over time, we may change some structures and accountabilities. That's almost never where we're going to start. And we will probably bring in new and different kinds of talent. We'll change business processes. We'll change technology and data. But we will do all of this in agile ways: testing, learning, trying. I'm going to turn the time over to Steve now to talk a little bit about how we do that. So if you'd go to the next slide, please, I'll turn it to Steve.
Thank you, Darrell. So the question is, what's the best way to get to an agile business, to an agile enterprise? Our belief is the best way is to do it using agile principles and practices. We've seen many practitioners do the opposite, start with a big bang. It often involves going behind closed doors, spending 6 months designing what a perfect agile system looks like, and then going out and dictating it to the entire company. Sometimes it involves actually firing large portions of the company and ask them to rehire for their jobs or reapply for their jobs. And these big bang approaches are the greatest irony because they're using a bureaucratic, top-down, anti-agile approach to becoming agile, and we rarely see those work. In fact, I don't really know of a single example of those that has actually worked. Instead, using agile principles and agile methods to become agile is far more effective. It starts with some approach that works best within their company and adapt that approach as they use it to make it work better and better. No company is going to succeed with Agile by just copying the model from another company, because large companies are far too different, and what works in one company depends on culture and many other things that another company might find quite different. So it's important to get the agile teams working within the context of the given company. Then as you're doing that, you can begin to scale and have more and more agile teams and more functions of the company. But even there, see the slides going away, coming back. But even there, there's still many additional.
I think something is wrong with the screen right now.
Yeah, we're just seeing a desktop rather than the slides.
Yeah, I think it's coming back.
Thank you. Okay, we're back. Okay. So the final step is to become an agile enterprise and achieve the balance of all those different elements of the business system that Darrell described on the previous page. Now, as you can see, even in that fully mature Agile enterprise, only maybe 10 or 20% of the company is doing Agile innovation, which means in our view, it's only that 10 or 20% of the company is actually formed into Agile teams. But as I'll talk about in a few minutes, it doesn't mean that the rest of the company and operations isn't changing. We still see great benefit in the rest of the business adopting Agile mindsets. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about the difference between those two. Next
Steve?
page, please. Oh, yes.
A quick question. We have a question here from Christian Fries, who asked, due to the fact that we work quite a lot with private equity companies, but actually also listed companies, are there a big difference or major differences between how PE, you can say, owned companies and listed companies do Agile?
Well, we do see some of the challenges of public companies come through when they try to implement Agile, and that being that many public companies feel a constraint of having predictable quarterly results and feel that that's what's going to actually get them the greatest stock price. And in the pursuit of that goal, they often quash innovation. They don't want to do things that seem too risky because that might put the next quarter earnings in jeopardy. And they do a lot of commanding and controlling to ensure those stable earnings. So we do see many public companies having difficulty with some of these Agile principles because of that pursuit. The real irony is that the research shows that what the market rewards is not stability, it's actually growth. And in the pursuit of this stability, companies are inevitably going to hurt their growth because of the negative impact on innovation that I just described. Private equity companies with private owners often have an easier time taking a multi-year view and therefore taking some risks, smart risks that are going to fuel growth. Now, of course, some private equity firms or private equity companies, might be trying to follow a different strategy, but in general, what I personally see is that they have an easier time taking that long-term approach, and therefore making these transitions and taking the risks, the smart risks needed to actually grow.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. So next page, please. So what is really difficult about achieving this path of becoming an Agile enterprise? When we ask Agile teams, we find that the most common barriers they run into relate to leadership and culture. So general organizational resistance to change, not enough leadership participation, organizational culture at odds with Agile values, inadequate management support, and sponsorship. So this comes down to the culture of the company, and companies' cultures are formed by leadership behaviors and cumulative leadership behaviors over time. So this really puts a significant weight on company leadership to be able to make an Agile transformation and Agile enterprise successful. So what does that mean for individual leaders' behaviors? Let's go to the next page, please. It means that leaders should spend less time micromanaging and more time actually leading. Now, it's very common in traditional bureaucratic command and control businesses that leaders are dictating everything that business units and functions are doing, and they spend a lot of time reviewing the actions that have been taken and the results to see if they're complying. Darrell talked about that previously. But in Agile enterprises, we see leaders spend much less time micromanaging. Instead, they're delegating. They're figuring out what work can be done by others, how far down in the organization that work can be done, and what's the best way to help them accomplish it. They're building leaders, they're making teams trustworthy by giving them responsibility, but also giving them accountability for the results that they are achieving. And they're also working to make the teams more motivated, happy, and creative by giving them that freedom to decide how to get things done. And as leaders spend less time with micromanaging, it frees them up to do only the things that they can do. First and foremost, they see their goal is to build an agile enterprise, an agile operating system, because that is the method that's going to help them accomplish all the rest of their goals. They are able to spend more time on corporate vision and prioritizing and sequencing strategic initiatives so that agile teams have clear direction about what the organization is trying to accomplish and how their team can help support those goals. Now, the teams are given a lot of flexibility in how to achieve those goals, but it's very important to have clarity around what goals they're trying to achieve so that the teams can collectively achieve the organization's objective. The agile leaders also spend time helping to simplify and focus work. Instead of trying to do too many projects at a time, too many initiatives at a time, which causes individuals to be fragmented across many, many projects, they recognize the inherent power of focus, as opposed to multitasking, which data would show simply makes people stupid. If a person's working across 5 different projects, about 60% of their time is wasted in switching costs, and it really reduces dramatically their ability to be effective. So both individuals and agile enterprises focus a lot more on the most important things, getting them done fewer at a time, but because they can then do them more quickly, actually getting a lot more done in the process. Agile leaders also spend a great deal of time removing impediments from their teams, understanding and surfacing what are the barriers that the teams are facing in achieving their goals, and then helping to address those barriers, whether it's resources or higher level decisions that need to be made. The leaders understand those and get them out of the way as quickly as possible. So next page, please. So what does an agile enterprise actually look like? This is a pretty complicated page. I'll spend a couple minutes walking through it. The red circles are persistent agile teams. These are teams that are in place for long periods of time, addressing a long-term opportunity. And the teams are as close to the business units or functions that they're directly innovating about as possible. So this is in contrast with some beliefs that you need to have kind of a skunk works and put most of your agile teams in some separate area so the rest of the business doesn't interfere with them. That actually is a real impediment to change, and it's also an impediment even to effective answers, because the people that, if you're trying to improve, let's say, a marketing process, the people in marketing are the ones who understand the process and the customers they're trying to serve best. So putting the teams as close to them as possible, and even taking some people from the line and putting them on the agile teams is the most effective. The gray teams are temporary teams working on projects that have just a finite duration. And then the shaded area, the gray shaded area are doing standard operations, and the areas in pink shading are supporting agile teams. So for example, the finance organization helping to provide the funding for agile teams, or the HR organization helping to provide the talent that are needed to those teams. You also see those red arrows. It shows that these teams are cross-functional. So even if a team is working in technology, it's going to have representatives from the areas that the technology supports on those teams to ensure that the technology, the software, is as customer focused as possible and is meeting the needs of the internal and external customers that it's serving as effectively as possible. Next page, please. So we talked before about perhaps only 10 or 20 of the people in an organization being part of Agile teams using Agile methods and practices. So these small dedicated teams focused on experimenting and prototyping with daily stand-ups and testing and learning as they build incremental features into their products. But we would expect the entire company to be following Agile mindsets. So the principles and values of Agile, so customer obsession, respect for individuals and power diversity, contributing innovative ideas. These are things which the entire company can do to help support the innovation of the Agile teams and to make the entire company more customer focused. Next page. So we talked before about the importance of leadership. We've done some surveying of Agile leaders and how they spend their time, both before an Agile transformation and 3 years into it. And it's really dramatically different. The more traditional executives are spending 60% of their time doing operations management, largely this micromanaging activity I was talking about earlier, operational reviews, financial reviews, meetings, to ensure that the organization is complying with their directives. They do spend about 30% of the time on talent-related issues, but again, that's often in more of a micromanagement way, evaluating people, allocating work, workforce planning, etc. And then they only typically have about 10% of their time left for strategy and growth, helping to set the direction of the company and really understanding their customers. 3 years into this, though, they spend the time very differently. They have managed through delegation and trust to reduce operations management to only 25% of their time. And they're reviewing results much more than they're reviewing activities and whether teams complied with the activities they asked them to do. And they are now spending 40% of the time, 4 times the time on strategy and growth, on really understanding customers, markets, competitors, helping to prioritize initiatives so the teams have direction. And then they're still spending about the same third of the time in talent and culture, but a lot of that is around more the cultural end and ensuring that the Agile teams have the training and coaching to be successful, as opposed to more kind of micromanaging performance. So I'm going to stop there and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Steve. So I have a question to begin with, at least. Here in the Nordics, quite a lot of agile transformations start in IT, but how come, and I don't know whether it's the same in the rest of the world, but I imagine it is. So how come that a lot of IT departments still seem to be quite slow?
Yeah, so this is really the irony. Agile is used in IT and software development probably more than any other function, at least historically it has been. Yet this is precisely the function that most companies would say is the slowest and the biggest bottleneck to their growth and change. So the reasons for this are that they really are threefold. First, many companies practice Agile in IT. They go through the motions, but they don't have the mindset. So the teams are doing sprints, they're doing stand-ups and daily planning and sprint reviews, but they actually haven't trusted and empowered the people to really make their own decisions and given them the tools required to do that. Second, Some companies see Agile as the magic bullet, but they aren't paying adequate attention to even other things within the IT department that they can control, like engineering practices and modular architecture. And finally, probably most importantly, Agile teams in software work much better in Agile enterprises because the other elements are in place for them to be successful. They have persistent funding that allows them to work on the same problems for a long period of time, as opposed to project funding that is micromanaging exactly what features and functions they deliver. And they have the talent strategies in place, and they have executive support for testing and learning and doing what they need to, that will sometimes give them failures, but failures that were smart to take and that they learn from. So many organizations just don't have those other elements in place. They try to do Agile just within the IT department without all those other success factors, and therefore they get only a fraction of the benefit.
Thank you. We have a question here. Is there a governance in Agile, or is it more a predictive lifecycle team?
I'll take a crack at that, and I will say there is a governance in Agile. It's interesting. Some people take Agile to an extreme and talk about holacracy, for example, where there are no titles and governance means less than it did before. And one of the things that we've seen in businesses that have adopted holacracy is that even though there's not a formal governance structure, the informal governance structures get more bureaucratic than ever before. It's just kind of below the surface. So no, Agile does use governance. You'll notice on Agile teams that there's an initiative owner or a product owner or a product manager or whatever you want to call it, who is not a traditional boss, but they do own the results of the teams. It's a very flat team structure. It's a very collaborative, we don't care about seniority. All team members are going to work together. But these Agile teams, as Steve showed you in his chart, are often embedded inside the functions and the business divisions of the company. And those people are going to be providing direction in terms of missions. So here's the mission we need you to accomplish. Now, how are you going to set objectives to achieve that? How are we going to measure progress so that we know how much money to give you? It's a more humane governance structure, much like Steve was showing you on the left-hand side of the chart, where people, we do value diversity, we do value everybody's opinions. It's a more humane way of working, but I think it's wrong to say there's no governance structure in Agile. There are definitely Agile structures.
Okay, thank you. I think we got a question from Stephen Brugger.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Darrell and Steve, for those presentations.
Yeah.
Really insightful. Well, I think I've got a. Yeah, I think you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was intrigued, Darrell, by your analogy with the Slinky and YouTube. And it's easy to see the innovation afterwards, of course. But how do your teams, in going to Agile, how do they best be prepared to recognize innovation when it falls on their head, right? If you're so I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. And also, is there any cultural differences? Like, are there certain cultures that are more open to this idea of Agile and being adaptive? So for both of you, or either.
So let me address the first question, the last question first, actually, which is to say, yes, there are cultures that are more amenable to Agile ways of working. In fact, in Scandinavia, I would say Agile has probably taken off as quickly as anywhere in the world. I think largely because it is a team-based culture. It is a more let's work together for the common good kind of culture. And I'm going to say some things that are politically incorrect. So I worry about that, particularly when you're recording and distributing things. But I will say that in some parts of Asia, for example, there is a greater reverence for leadership and less of an inclination to challenge what a leader has to say. And it takes a little bit longer for teams to be willing to speak up. There are other parts of Europe where bureaucracy and command and control is a very natural form of management. And there we sometimes see leaders using Agile as just one more club to beat people over the head and say, do what I say faster than before. That's what Agile means. And in those kinds of cases, it's very dangerous. I think people get a misperception of it. Let's see, your first question about how do you stay awake? How do you just find these things as opposed to letting them hit you on the head? It's a great question. And, you know, one of the misunderstandings of sprints is a lot of people think we run in short sprints, 2-week sprints or 1-week sprints or 3-week sprints, largely to keep people very busy and just running breathlessly from one task to another. And we just burn them out. And that's not at all what the purpose is. The purpose is to make sure that we are bringing some working prototype in front of customers as frequently as possible. That's the big deal about sprints. And so what we find in Agile organizations is they truly are customer centric as opposed to boss centric. And it's easy to tell when you get inside an organization. Are they just trying to please the boss and do what the boss says? Or are they willing to challenge what a boss says because they know what the customer wants? And there's good data that proves customers themselves are better at telling you what they want when you show it to them than bosses are. In fact, a boss is the worst predictor of whether an innovation is going to be successful or not. A customer with a group of Agile leaders, of entrepreneurs, they're quite good at it. But we move from a boss-centric culture to a customer-centric culture. And we do that by having frequent ongoing collaboration with customers where every week or so we're saying, do you like this? What do you not like? What would you change? What would you give up? How would you direct me? And the sooner we can get things in front of customers, the better their feedback is and the more receptive we are to their feedback. Because if we've got a year invested in a product and a customer criticizes it, we're likely to brush what they say under the rug. But after a week, we're all more open to feedback. So it's a different way of working, but the key is customer centricity.
Thank you, Darrell. A quick question here. So the agile mindsets, they're well aligned with Lean and Lean Sigma. How can you develop that in parallel? These two, you can say, principles.
Again, Steve, I'll start, but feel free to weigh in. I believe Lean and Agile are close cousins. They have so much in common in terms of focusing on the customer and finding ways to work on only things that create value, eliminating things that don't create value. They are close customers, are close cousins. I will point out one thing, though, that I worry a little bit about when people adopt like Lean Six Sigma and use that as the primary cultural driver in the organization. And that is, it has a tendency to drive out variability. And as a result, when it starts being applied too rigorously to innovation, it stops experimentation because we're afraid of inefficiency. So we've seen places like 3M and GE, for example, that got very deep into Lean Six Sigma, applied it too broadly and got into trouble. So balance, I would say. Those kinds of concepts, fabulous for for operations, when combined with using Agile and innovation, they harmonize beautifully.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that Six Sigma is a very good tool for reducing variability in operations, so kind of unintended variability. The danger is when you begin to apply that philosophy to innovation. It's exactly what you don't want in innovation. Innovation, you're trying to increase variability in order to drive creativity and change.
Thank you. I think we have room for one more question. Is that okay, Steve? Yeah. So one question I know everybody is talking about is often the combination of a stage gate model and Agile. Is it possible to combine those two ways of looking at innovation and projects, or is that not recommendable?
Steve, you look like you have a thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work in software engineering, and so I say that in some ways you could say that Agile is all about stage gates. You're constantly looking at the benefits of an innovation and deciding whether to take it to the next step or whether to stop, and using feedback loops and customer input all along the way. The problem is that the way traditional stage gates are done is actually an infestation of kind of a waterfall method, where the gate is still a gate around a very big piece of design work that hasn't gotten a lot of customer input along the way. The gate might just be, have you technically proven this can work? Or have you made the case in such and such a way? But the whole process could be a 1-year process before you finally get the customer input you need to determine whether what you started out doing even made sense or not. So I think a stage gate philosophy done with very small increments and with customer feedback along the way can be valuable, but the traditional method that I just described is sort of the opposite of the kind of customer-led agility that we're looking for.
Thank you. I think that we are close to the end here. So, Stephen, if you would like to close up with some remarks.
Sure, and maybe I think we can add one more question. Maybe once you take the one from the next one, there's one on how do you get your keep your team together, basically. Maybe you could ask that one, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
So that's the one that says, what would be your tip to organizations to ensure their agile teams don't sail away on their own speedboats and while leaving the bigger organization behind? I thought that was a very relevant question to ask you too.
Yeah, what a wonderful question, because we do see that when innovation labs get too separate from the organization, that they start sometimes working on very interesting things, but not always relevant to the organizations. And again, it's a matter of balance. I think we want these teams embedded inside the organization so that they, number one, stay close to the customers and to the internal customers as well as external customers, and to make sure that their missions are focused on things that will be useful to the businesses. We are likely to take some agile teams to look at things beyond current businesses or that fall between the cracks of current businesses, because in agile, we always want to look at the end-to-end customer experience and say, is there something that we're missing in the current organization? But I think it's a mistake. That's the problem with skunkworks, is that we've seen so many times people pull the agile teams away from the organization. They lose focus on what the business units and the functions actually need. They develop something they think is going to be cool. And then even if it is a very insightful innovation, when they try to bring it back to the organization and say, here it is, adopt it, scale it, the organization says, thanks, but no thanks. That's not relevant to us. So again, keep in mind, we have to get agile teams to do two things: work on the right things and make sure that once they develop something, they will actually be adopted and scaled by the organization. Otherwise, it's just trees falling in the forest with no ears to hear.
Great. Steve, anything to add on to that?
Nope, that's
Right.
complete answer.
Good. Well, we are out of time, and so we will be able to share these slides afterwards, and as well as recordings. So let's keep an eye out for that. We'll share that with all the participants. So with that, let me just wrap up. And first off, thanks, Darrell and Steve. Great session. Very interesting and relevant discussions we had. Great questions, and just thanks for sharing your unique insight with us today. It's been really great. And I think the takeaway that I heard that the most important was plan to adapt or plan to fail. So we can certainly take that home in our back pocket, Darrell and Steve. So thank you.
Thank you.
And also to Bain here in Copenhagen, and Amdi, thanks for leading this conversation. It's been great. It's been a great partnership to be in on this and that's on behalf of both AmCham Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. So thank you so much. And
Our pleasure.
good. And so just a quick note before we round out here, just be sure to register for our next Pan-Nordic US Election Series event. It's a webinar on October 5 with Bruce Stokes on how American public opinion will shape the next US administration. You can register with your respective AmCham. So with that, I would just like to thank you for a great program today. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and stay safe. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you, folks. Bye.
Bye now. And now, Steve and Darrell, you have full days ahead of you on the East Coast, right?
We do indeed. And I'm jumping to the next meeting, so I'll drop. But thank you. We appreciate being invited to join you. What a great group. If there are follow-up questions or things we can do to help, please let us know.
Oh, we'll absolutely do that. So thank you both. And once this Corona thing's over, we look forward to seeing you in Scandinavia.
Oh, indeed. I'm dying to get back over there. I love it. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.